Part 1. The Decoy. Eleanor signed the marriage certificate the way people sign things they've already spent. Slow, careful, a small smile saved for the last letter of her new name. Across the reception room, my father slid the pen back toward her like he was handing over a gift he'd wrapped himself. He was beaming. He looked 10 years younger and about that much less careful. The officiant had already done the part about better and worse. My father had said his vows like a man reading a winning lottery number aloud. Eleanor had said hers looking just past his shoulder at the house. She spent 8 months hunting a trophy. She picked the decoy. Nobody in that room knew it yet. Not the 90 guests, not my father, and definitely not the woman in white who used to leave my apartment at 2 in the morning telling me I'd never amount to anything. Now she was going to be my stepmother. She'd worked very hard for it. You had to respect the commitment, if not the direction. We dated for a year and a half, back when I was the version of me she thought was safe to underestimate. Long enough for her to catalog every soft spot I had and file it for later. She kept receipts on people the way other women keep photographs. When we ended, she didn't cry. She asked, very calmly, what my father was worth. I told her I didn't know. It was the only lie I ever told her. I've been comfortable with it. The estate's east room was full, the one with the tall windows, because Eleanor had asked for the one with the tall windows. Flowers everywhere. A string quartet in the corner. Half the guests knew my father's name, and half of those used to know mine. A man who tried to recruit me twice, years ago, caught my eye across the floor and gave me the small, kind nod you give a dog that used to be able to run. I gave it back. Let him keep the story he liked. At the family table, one chair sat empty. The place card still read the name of our family lawyer. She hadn't come. The family lawyer wasn't at the wedding. I didn't mention it to anyone. She sent a very nice card. Julian found me by the windows with 2 glasses of champagne and the easy smile of a man who'd bet on the winning horse early and wanted credit for it. Caleb. He pressed a glass into my hand I hadn't asked for. You holding up? Wood for you. Am I holding something? You know what I mean. He dropped his voice, warm and terrible. She's good for him. Maybe let today just be a good day. I took the champagne. It's a great day, I said, truly. He didn't catch the temperature of that. Julian never did. He clinked my glass and drifted back toward the people who mattered now, and I let him go. You don't argue with a weather vane. You just note which way it's pointing, and when. Eleanor crossed the room in a slow arc, collecting attention like coats at a door. She stopped at a cluster of my father's investors and laid a hand on my arm. And this, she said, warm as a brochure, is my stepson, Caleb. Technically, I said. The investor, an older man with a merger for a handshake, blinked. Technically? Technically, I said again, and left it there, in the middle of the floor, for anyone who wanted to pick it up. Eleanor's smile widened by exactly the amount required. He's shy, she told the man, and steered the conversation somewhere with better acoustics. Sensitive boy, the investor said to her back, chuckling, already forgetting me. She'd already learned the trick of talking about me instead of to me. It's a genuinely useful skill. I decided to let her keep practicing on strangers. A woman I'd known since I was a boy, one of my mother's oldest friends, caught my arm on the way to the bar and squeezed it, the way you squeeze a widow at a funeral. You poor thing, she said, and she meant it kindly, which made it the worst thing anyone said to me all night. Your father seems happy at least. He does, I agreed. That's the important thing. She patted my arm again and drifted off toward the champagne, satisfied she'd been gracious to the family disappointment. I let her have it. Grace costs a stranger nothing, and I've never once corrected a person for being kind to me for the wrong reasons. It's tactically useless, and it makes the correction, when it finally comes, so much more interesting to watch land. Later, I found the doorway to the family table. My father was there, mid-laugh, Eleanor's hand resting over his on the white cloth. It was a good laugh, full. I hadn't heard it from him in a long time. He saw me. I know he saw me, because his eyes did the small thing eyes do when they land on someone and quietly decide what to spend on them. Then he turned back to Eleanor, laughed again at something she said, and he did not wave me over. I stood in the doorway a bit longer than was comfortable. Nobody waved, so I stopped standing there. A year ago, he'd have called across a crowded room for me, loud, embarrassing, mine. Tonight, he found the wall behind my head very interesting. Fine, I can be furniture. Furniture sees everything and gets moved by no one. Then Eleanor stood, tapped a fork against her glass, and announced she wanted to show a few close friends what she'd done with the place. My father clapped like she'd cured a disease. I followed the little tour into the house. I wanted to see it too. She led them through the sitting room first, hand out like a gallery guide. "We opened the whole thing up," she said. "It was so heavy before, so much history you couldn't breathe." The history she couldn't breathe around was my mother's. I kept that to myself and kept walking. Gorgeous, a woman in emerald side touching a new drape. "Eleanor, you have such an eye. You just have to be brave enough to change things," Eleanor said. "Most people aren't. Most people don't have someone else's money and a decorator on retainer," I thought, but bravery is a nicer word, and it was her day. The tour ended, somehow, in a bathroom. Not the main one, the guest bathroom of the second-floor hall, a room whose entire job is to exist quietly for people who are only visiting. Eleanor opened the door like she was unveiling a new wing of a museum. "I wanted this house to feel like a home again," she said, warm, considered, a space where legacy and warmth can finally coexist. She swept a hand across the wall. New tile, beige, a scented candle sat on the counter, unlit, expensive, apologizing for nothing. "Every room should say something," she went on. "This one says, someone lives here who actually cares." I put my hands in my pockets and looked at the tile. In the corner, a member of the house staff was refolding the same set of towels for the third time, deeply and professionally interested in the towels. "It's very calming," the woman in emerald offered. "That's the word," Eleanor said, delighted. "Calming." Then she turned to me, chin lifted, waiting. "Well," she said, "what do you think, Caleb?" I looked at the beige, I looked at the candle, I looked back at the beige. I gave her the smallest nod a human neck can produce. "I knew you'd see it," she said, and glided out toward the next room, gathering her audience behind her as she went. I stayed a second in the doorway. She redecorated the guest bathroom, with my money, in beige. I'm choosing to see this as a cry for help. The candle, I'd learn later, cost more than the morning staff earn in a week. The tile came in from a supplier in Milan. She'd flown a consultant across an ocean for a powder room that no one who visits this house will ever remember using. None of it was hers to spend. She'd never once wondered why the cards kept working, why the accounts never blinked, why a house this size simply absorbed her taste without a single question. People rarely check the plumbing while the water still runs. The staff member finished with the towels, glanced up, and caught my eye. For half a second on her way out. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. She'd worked here longer than Eleanor had known my father. I didn't stop any of it. Why would I? A person redecorating a house they believe they own is a person telling you, in advance and in detail, exactly how the next year is going to go. You don't interrupt a confession like that. You take notes. By the time I caught up to the group, Eleanor had already wandered off toward the one part of this house that would not rearrange itself for her. She just didn't know that part existed yet. His name is Sterling. He's run the estate since before my mother got sick, and he runs it the way the good ones do, invisibly, until you need him, and then completely. Eleanor found him in the service corridor, the plain one behind the kitchens where the house actually gets decided. She changed out of the ceremony dress. She had a list, and she'd clearly enjoyed making it. "Mr. Sterling," she said his name like she was trying it on for size. "A few changes going forward. Morning staff start at 6 now, not 7. The east rooms are cleaned daily, not twice a week. The wine cellar is inventoried and the key comes to me. And I'd like the weekly schedule brought up for my approval on Sundays." Sterling listened to all of it. He has a good face for listening, patient, unhurried, the face of a man who has heard a great many plans come through this corridor and watched most of them leave it again. "Understood, Mrs. Ashworth," he said. And then he did a small thing. He looked at me. It wasn't long. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of glance you'd miss entirely if you weren't the reason for it. A question, asked and answered with no word in it at all. I didn't nod. I didn't move. I stood with my hands in my pockets and my weight on nothing in particular, and I let the half second go by. Sterling turned back to Eleanor. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth," he said, warmer now. "I'll see to it." She smiled, pleased with how smoothly the world was agreeing to rearrange itself. "Good," she said, and she left the corridor first. That was the mistake. Small, invisible, entirely hers. In this house, the person who leaves the room first is the person who doesn't yet understand how the room works. The morning staff started at 7, the way they always had. The east rooms were cleaned twice that week, the way they always were. The cellar key stayed exactly where it had hung for 15 years, on a hook only Sterling's hand ever seemed to find. No schedule arrived on Sunday for anyone's approval. Nothing happened, which was precisely the something that happened. Eleanor noticed on the third day. I got to watch her notice. She came back down to the service corridor with the list still in her hand and a question already going stiff in her jaw. Sterling was there. So was I, further along the hall, doing nothing in the specific way I've spent years turning into a craft. She didn't ask him why. That's the thing about her I'd underestimated once, a long time ago. She is not stupid. She saw the staff moving on the old schedule. She saw Sterling's unbothered face. She saw the cellar key on its hook. And she did the arithmetic faster than I'd expected her to. She didn't raise her voice. She looked down the corridor, at Sterling, at the staff, at me standing quiet at the far end of it. I see, she said, and she left the room. Again. First. She didn't understand it yet. But she'd felt the shape of it. A house that smiles at her, agrees with her, and then quietly goes on doing exactly what it has always done. A house with a spine she hasn't been introduced to. I hadn't said a word all day worth counting. I'd nodded once at the bathroom and stood still in a hallway. That was the entire day's work, and it had gone perfectly. Late that night, I found my father alone on the terrace, tie loosened, a glass in his hand, and a whole married life spread out in front of him. Big day, I said. It was. He didn't look at me. He looked at the lawn. You could try to be happy for me, Caleb, just once. It wouldn't kill you. I let that sit a moment. I think you should have your lawyers look at the arrangement, I said, before anything gets mixed together. That's all. One afternoon. Now he looked at me, and there it was, the tired disappointment he keeps in a drawer reserved specifically for my face. She said you'd do this, he said. Make it small. Make it about paperwork. He shook his head slowly. Not everyone is a threat, son. Not everyone is a case you're building. You're right, I said. Not everyone is. He heard the shape of that, but not the point of it, and he decided the shape was close enough. Go to bed, Caleb, he said, not unkindly. It's been a long day for all of us. Okay, I said, because you only get to warn a man once before it curdles into nagging, and I don't nag. I keep records. I'd said it. Out loud, on a night with a house full of witnesses, and a timestamp on every phone in every pocket. Whatever came next, the record would show that I told him. Once. Quietly. On the record. That was going to matter far more than he could imagine, standing out there with his drink and his new wife and his very long day. I almost stayed. Almost said the rest of it, that this was never about the money, that I'd spent years quietly making sure a night like this couldn't take anything real from him. But love isn't a document, and he'd stopped reading anything I handed him a long time ago. Below us, Eleanor came out onto the lower steps and stood looking at the estate, the dark shape of the house, the grounds, the whole heavy weight of it stacked up against the sky. She exhaled, slow, satisfied. The exhale of a person setting down something heavy they fully intend to keep. She looked at the house the way people look at things they already own. I found that interesting. Part 2. The Wall. 17 days into the marriage, Eleanor decided it was time to have money the way she believed married people had money. The first 2 weeks had gone beautifully for her, and I let them. She hosted, she rearranged, she learned the names of the staff and used them a little too often, the way you flash a new watch. On the surface, the house bent to her exactly the way houses are supposed to bend to the woman who runs them. Underneath the surface, nothing moved that she hadn't been quietly allowed to move. But surfaces are where she lives, and the surface was going very well. So she got ambitious, which was the plan. It was always the plan. You don't build a wall and then beg someone to walk into it. You build the wall and you wait, and you make the far side look like everything they want. She didn't ask my father for it. Asking is for people who aren't sure. She sat down at a little writing desk by the east window, put the household account number in front of her, and called the bank to add a card in her name. I was on the couch across the room with a book I wasn't really reading. She didn't mind me there. By then I was part of the furniture inventory, the son who came with the house, low maintenance, no resale value. Yes, hello, she said, all warmth. I'd like to add a supplementary card to an existing account, the Ashworth household account. This is Mrs. Ashworth. She said her new name into the phone like a password she'd finally earned the right to use. There was a pause on the line. Then the small betrayal of hold music, thin, cheerful, the kind of melody designed by people who have never been kept waiting for anything that mattered. Eleanor waited. She has excellent posture when she's furious. Shoulders back, chin level, one manicured finger tapping a slow count against the desk. The music looped. It got to the cheerful part again. I turned a page. Here is the thing about Eleanor that the hold music understood better than my father ever would. She could charm a room of 90 people. She could make a 60-year-old man feel 25. She could not charm a hold cue. A phone menu has no eyes to hold, no ego to flatter, no lonely widower to warm. It just plays the same 4 cheerful bars and waits to see who runs out of patience first. She was losing to a saxophone, and she knew it, and she couldn't do a thing about it but sit up straighter. The representative came back. I couldn't hear the words, only the shape of them, and the way Eleanor's spine changed to receive them. "I'm sorry," she said, lighter now, dangerously light. "Say that again? Co-authorization from whom?" Another pause. No, that can't be right. My husband is David Ashworth. It's his account." A beat. "Then whose name is on the authorization?" Whatever the answer was, it wasn't a name she expected. I know because her tapping fingers stopped. Just stopped, mid-count, flat against the wood. She recovered fast. I'll give her that. She has always recovered fast. "Fine," she said. "I understand. Thank you for your help." Warm again. Perfect again. She set the phone down with the care of a woman who wanted very badly to throw it. I let the silence sit for exactly as long as an innocent man would. "Account issues?" I asked, not looking up from the page. She turned, and the smile arrived right on schedule. "Just admin," she said. "Nothing interesting." "Admin," I said. "The worst." "Admin, right." She tried to move $40,000 of a household account into a new card in her own name, 17 days into a marriage, and hit a wall she couldn't see the top of. Admin is what you call it when you're in the room with someone who already knows exactly what it was. I didn't know the exact figure yet, not to the dollar. I'd know it by that evening. Somewhere across the city, at a desk far quieter than this one, a woman I trusted was writing down a date and a time. Eleanor picked the phone back up. New number this time. Her voice dropped into something more private, more careful. She stepped toward the window, giving the call her back. "It's me," she said. "I need to ask you something, about a trust structure." I closed my book, not because I was done, because I liked the sound of that sentence, and I wanted to hear how it ended. She lowered her voice further, and I lost the words. That was fine. I already knew the words. I'd written the wall she was standing at years ago, with help from the only person who ever read the whole thing. The next morning I went to the bank myself, not for anything urgent. I keep certain habits precisely so that days like this look ordinary. I put my own card into the terminal in the marble lobby, the same branch, the same account family. It worked the way it always works. The receipt slid out with a name printed at the top that was not my father's. I glanced at it for about as long as you'd glance at a parking stub. Then I folded it once and put it in my pocket. There's a kind of power that makes noise, and a kind that just prints quietly on cheap paper and asks nothing of you. At home, the receipt would go in a drawer with the others. I won't pretend it's a special drawer, or that I take the papers out at night to admire them. It's just a drawer, but it feels the way a slow river feels, a little, and then one season all at once, and only ever in the direction the ground already decided. Eleanor was standing in that riverbed right now, wondering why her shoes were wet. She thought the problem was the bank. The problem was the geography. She spent that week testing it. A charge held for review here, a vendor apologizing that the account required a second authorization there. Nothing dramatic, nothing a warm voice and a follow-up call couldn't smooth over. But each smoothing left a mark. A note in a file, a small official record that Mrs. Ashworth had tried the door and found it locked. She believed she was managing a run of glitches. She was signing an attendance sheet. Every glitch was another line in Sophia's handwriting, and Sophia's handwriting was getting longer by the day. My phone buzzed on the walkout. One name on the screen. I answered before the second ring. "She's moving faster than I expected," Sophia said. "No hello." Sophia doesn't do hellos. She thinks they're a waste of a first sentence. "How fast?" "Bank inquiry, 17 days after the wedding." I stepped out into the cold. "Let her move." "How far?" Sophia asked. "Far enough," I said. A short silence, the good kind, the kind between two people who understand each other and don't need to prove it. Then the soft click of her hanging up to go back to work. Somewhere, a log got one line longer. That was the entire conversation, and it was the most honest one I'd had in weeks. Sophia had drawn the architecture of this house when my mother was still alive to sign it. She wasn't at the wedding because there was nothing there worth witnessing. She'd be at the part that mattered. She always is. People think a lawyer like Sophia is a weapon you point. She isn't. She's a wall you build once, correctly, and then never have to think about again unless someone runs at it. My mother had thought about it for both of us, a long time ago, in the months when she still had months. Everything since had just been the wall doing its job. That was the whole shape of my advantage, and I never said it out loud, not even to myself in a room this empty. I didn't have to win anything. I already owned the board. I just had to let Eleanor keep playing until she'd bet something she couldn't take back. That afternoon, Eleanor threw her first dinner party as lady of the estate. I wasn't invited, which was its own small tell. You don't need to exclude furniture, and yet. I found out how it went the way everyone finds out anything now. A photo, posted late, warm lighting, a long table dress to be seen. Eleanor at the head of it, radiant, mid-laugh, and 3 seats down, comfortable as a house cut in the sun, Julian, wineglass up, tagged. Smiling at something off camera with the full ease of a man who has picked his side and finds the accommodations excellent. Julian and I have been friends since we were 9. He'd borrowed money from me twice and borrowed nerve from me more often than that. He'd read the room the way he always read the room, found the warm end and sat down in it. I understood the instinct completely. I just no longer had any use for the man who kept obeying it. I looked at his face for a second longer than the rest of the picture. Then I put the phone away. You don't argue with a photograph, you just save it. That night, Eleanor tried the direct route. I was in the hall when I heard her find my father in the study, voice soft, wifely, laid over something harder. "Darling," she said, "small thing. The bank gave me the strangest runaround today about a card. Some co-authorization nonsense. I didn't want to bother you, but it's a little embarrassing, being told I can't be added to my own husband's account." My father, deep in a newspaper he wasn't reading either. "Oh, that. Old structure, from years back. Bit of a maze. I'll sort it out." "Whose name is it, though? They wouldn't tell me, on the authorization." A pause, the newspaper rustled. "Admin detail," he said. "Estate paperwork. Honestly, Ellie, it's older than both of us and half of it I never understood myself. Leave it with me." "Of course," she said, all silk. "I just want everything to be simple, for us." "It will be," he promised, a man promising weather. She let it go. Not because she believed him. Eleanor has never once in her life believed a man who says, "Leave it with me," but because pushing harder would have shown him the shape of what she was really after, and she wasn't ready to be seen yet. So she kissed his forehead and filed it. She's a filer, same as me. That's what made us dangerous together, once. I remember when I thought that was a good thing. 2 people who kept receipts, who never forgot a slight or a kindness, who could rebuild an argument from 3 weeks back word for word. We used to think it meant we understood each other. It actually meant we were each quietly building a case the whole time, against the day one of us would need one. She just never knew I'd started mine earlier and kept it neater and had a far better lawyer. The bank called my father 2 days later. I know because I was in the study returning a book when his phone rang, and I watched the whole thing without appearing to watch anything at all. "Ashworth," he said. Then he listened. His eyebrows did a small, confused thing. "A verification request on mod? What request? I didn't authorize any mod." He listened more. No, that's fine. It's fine. Probably my wife getting set up. Yes, thank you." He hung up. And here is the entire beat, the whole of my father in one gesture. He looked at the phone for 3 full seconds. Something passed behind his eyes, a question with the beginnings of a shape. Then he turned it face down on the desk, the way you cover a card you've decided not to play, or a truth you've decided not to have. "Admin error," he said to the room, to himself, to no one. "Sounds like it," I said from the doorway and left him to it. 2 weeks earlier, I'd stood on a terrace and told him, in the plainest words I own, to have his lawyers look at the arrangement. He'd called me small for it. Now a bank was telling him the same thing in a different language, and he was turning it face down on a desk. The difference between us has never been intelligence. My father is not a stupid man. The difference is that I look at the thing that frightens me, and he decorates a room so he doesn't have to. He could have called Sophia that afternoon. He could have called anyone. He had a bank on the phone telling him his own account had a name on it he didn't recognize, and he chose the version of the story that let him keep his good mood. I didn't hold it against him. Much. A man who marries a knife is going to spend a lot of energy insisting it's a spoon. Across town, in an office with better carpet than conscience, Eleanor sat in front of a lawyer she paid to be quicker than mine. "I'm running into a trust structure I don't have visibility on," she said, and slid a folder across the desk. "It's blocking things it shouldn't be able to block. I need you to tell me what it is and how to get around it." The lawyer opened the folder, flipped a page, flipped another, frowned in the specific way expensive lawyers frown when the problem is more interesting than the client. "Sell me the trust documents," he said. "The registration, the deed, whatever established it. I'll find the seams." Eleanor was quiet a moment. "That's the thing," she said. I can't find them. They're not in the house. They're not with his father's firm. They're not anywhere I'm allowed to look. The lawyer set down his pen, and for a long moment, in a room she was paying for, nobody said anything at all. Part 3. The record. Eleanor's lawyer called back 4 days later, and I'd have paid good money to watch her face while he did it. Except I didn't have to pay anything, because Sophia tells me these things for free. She took the call at her desk, in the good chair, with the confidence of a woman who has hired a solution and is simply waiting for it to be delivered. "Tell me you have something," she said. "I have the shape of something," her lawyer said. "The household assets, the estate, the operating company, they're all held under a single structure, a trust. I've requested the registration documents through the usual channels." And the usual/chal came back empty, which is unusual. A pause. "I'm running into a trust structure I don't have visibility on." "Unusual how?" Eleanor said. "Unusual is the word people use right before they explain their hourly rate. Unusual as in, I've done this for 22 years. I've pulled 1,000 of these records and they come back inside a week. This one came back with a note telling me to direct any further questions to Counsel of Record." A beat. "That's not a slow clerk, Eleanor. That's a fence somebody paid to build." "So find the gate." "There isn't always a gate. Sometimes there's just a wall and a name." "Then get me the name." Another silence. "The name," he said carefully, "is part of what I'd have to go carefully about." Eleanor's voice stayed pleasant, and only got more pleasant, which is how you can tell she'd started to grip. "Then get visibility. That's the entire reason I called you." There was a silence on the line then, not a thinking silence, the other kind, the one a careful man makes when he's deciding how much of the truth his client can afford to hear. "Eleanor," he said finally, "I would need to go very carefully here." "Then go very carefully," she said, and hung up, satisfied, having heard an instruction where a warning had been. That was the tell, and she walked right past it. A lawyer who says he'd need to go carefully isn't describing a locked door. He's describing a door with something behind it he doesn't want to be caught standing near. She heard delay. She should have heard depth. But Eleanor has never once believed that a wall was really a wall. In her experience, walls were just men who hadn't been offered the right thing yet. She'd spent her whole life finding the soft place in a hard surface and leaning on it until it opened. This surface didn't have a soft place. My mother made sure of that, in an office a lot like the one Eleanor's lawyer was sweating in, years before Eleanor ever learned my father's name. I almost admired the effort. Watching Eleanor try to litigate her way into my mother's foresight was like watching someone pick a lock that had been welded shut, then bricked over, then quietly removed from every map. So Eleanor did what people do when the big thing won't move. She went looking for a small thing she could move instead, to remind herself she still could. She called the house and asked for the estate manager. The dining room, she'd decided, was wrong. I want to be clear that there was nothing wrong with the dining room. But it was the one room grand enough to be worth conquering and small enough to seem conquerable, and she needed a win she could see from a chair. She walked it first, alone, the way a general walks a field before a battle already won inside his own head. She nudged the chair 2 inches to the left and stepped back to appreciate the enormous difference. She stood at the window and pictured the mornings, sunlight on the wood, her seated at the head of it, the whole room finally arranged around the fact of her. Then she went and found the one man whose agreement she thought she needed. "Mr. Sterling," she said when he came to her, "I want to reconfigure the dining room. The main table comes forward, toward the windows. I want the light on it in the mornings. Bring the 2 side chairs in from the blue room, and the new centerpiece I ordered goes in the center, permanently, not just for events. I want the whole room to feel like it's finally being used." Sterling listened to every word of it. He has, as I've said, a gift for listening. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth," he said. "I'll see to the arrangements." She thanked him warmly. She even touched his arm. She was building the rapport of a woman who believed rapport was the mechanism that made staff obey. She left the room certain the dining room was already, in some meaningful sense, moving. I came down to dinner that evening the way I come down every evening. The table was exactly where it has been for as long as I can remember. Same position, same angle to the window. The 2 side chairs were in the blue room, where they live, being blue room chairs. The new centerpiece was nowhere I could see it, which suggested Sterling had found it a home commensurate with his opinion of it. I sat down at the head of the table that had not moved 1 inch, and I unfolded my napkin. The housekeeper brought the first plate and set it down without ceremony, the way you serve someone you've served 10,000 times. "Evening, Mr. Caleb. Cook did the lamb, the way you like it." "Evening, Mrs. Shaw. Thank you." I looked at the room around us, unmoved, unbothered, exactly itself. Busy day? No busier than usual, she said, which in this house is a complete sentence, a full report, and a small act of loyalty all at once. She refilled my water and went back to the kitchen, where the real government of the estate has always sat. She had very strong feelings about the table placement. The table had stronger feelings about staying where it was. I considered sending it flowers. It's a strange thing, being invisible in your own house on purpose. Eleanor believes she's living with a defeated man. She's actually living inside a machine that happens to be shaped like a defeated man, and every button she presses is wired to a bell that only rings in a room she's never been shown. That is the whole comedy of my life right now, if you want it in one image. A woman issuing confident orders to a house that has quietly agreed, among itself, to ignore her. Nobody argues with her. Nobody defies her. They just say, of course, and then the world stays exactly as it was. Sterling passed the doorway as I ate. He didn't stop. He didn't report. He gave me the smallest nod a man can give and carried on down the hall about his business, which is, and has always been, the actual business of this house. I nodded back. That's our entire correspondence. It's the most reliable relationship I have. Eleanor found the table 2 mornings later. She came into the dining room with her coffee and her certainty, and she stopped. The table sat where it had always sat. The blue room chairs were still in the blue room, being blue. Her permanent centerpiece was, presumably, living out a long and quiet retirement in a cupboard somewhere Sterling felt it belonged. She stood very still. I watched her do the math from the far doorway, the same equation as the service corridor, the same silence waiting at the end of it. Table forward? No. Chairs moved? No. Instruction given, received, agreed to, ignored. She didn't call for Sterling. She didn't raise her voice. She set her coffee down on the unmoved table, looked at it the way you look at a person who has let you down quietly and repeatedly, and then she put her expression back on straight. Morning, I said from the doorway. Good morning, Caleb, she said, warm as summer, and walked out without one word about the table, because to mention the table was to admit the table had beaten her, and she would sooner lose the ground than say so out loud. Later, Sophia caught me in the side hall for 11 seconds. I've been keeping a record, she said. I know, I said. She didn't elaborate. Sophia never elaborates. She said it the way you'd mention the weather to someone who already owns an umbrella, and then she was gone, back to the quiet work of turning Eleanor's every ambition into a dated line on a page. I didn't ask to see the record. I didn't need to. I've learned that the strongest thing you can hold is a thing you never take out to look at. You just let it get harassing. There's a version of all this where I'm cruel, where I sit her down on the first day, slide a deed across the table, and watch the color leave her face while she's still holding her coffee. I've pictured it. I'm not going to pretend I haven't. But a fall you arrange for someone is just an argument with a body count. A fall a person builds for themselves, brick by confident brick, is a verdict. And I didn't want to win an argument with Eleanor. I wanted the verdict. Verdicts don't get overturned at a dinner party. My father, meanwhile, was starting to notice the temperature of his own house. It came to him in pieces, the way it always comes to the last person to admit it. He walked into the study, and Julian was already leaving it, the two of them mid-sentence about something that stopped the moment my father filled the doorway. Julian gave him a clap on the shoulder on the way past, easy, unbothered, a guest who'd become a fixture, and Eleanor's voice behind him picked up a new, brighter register, the one people use to paint over a conversation you weren't meant to walk into. David told himself it was nothing. He was good at that. He'd had a lot of practice this month. She's under stress, he decided. New house, new marriage, my difficult son lurking in every doorway. If the rooms went quiet when he entered, well, he was probably imagining it. A man in love does a great deal of imagining, most of it in the direction he'd prefer. But the pieces kept arriving whether he wanted them or not. He found Eleanor at her desk with a document open in front of her, and when he came close, she closed it. Not dramatically, just a small, smooth motion, a hand laid flat, a folder folded shut, the reflex of someone who has decided, in advance, which papers a husband gets to see. What's that? He asked. Nothing. Household things. She'd answered before he finished the question, which is its own kind of answer. He stood there a moment. His hand went to the edge of the desk. He could have asked her to open it. He could have picked it up himself. It was, after all, his house, or so the brass plate on the door still claimed. He didn't open it. He looked at the closed folder, and he took his hand off the desk, and he said, "Don't work too late," and he left. He closed the door behind him, gently, the way you close a door on a room you've decided not to enter in more than one sense. Over the next few days, he kept catching the edges of things, a bank statement half under a magazine that she slid away when he sat down beside her, a call she took out in the garden, pacing, that ended the instant he stepped outside. The word trust surfacing once in her voice through a doorway and going back under before he could be sure he'd heard it at all. Each one, alone, was nothing. A grown man can explain away a single closed folder. My father had been explaining things away his whole life. It was practically a hobby of his. But they were arriving in a rhythm now. And rhythm is the one thing a person keeps hearing even after he's decided to stop listening. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his phone. The voicemail was still there. I'd left it the morning after the wedding, 4 sentences, no heat in them, just asking him again to let Sophia walk him through the arrangement before anything got tangled. I'd said the same thing to his face on the terrace. This was me putting it somewhere he couldn't pretend I hadn't. He'd never played it. It sat in his phone with a little unheard dot beside it, and he'd looked at that dot more times than he'd ever admit. He looked at it again now. His thumb hovered. All he had to do was press the small triangle and hear his son ask him, calmly, to protect himself. He set the phone down, screen going dark, and he sat in the quiet of the room his new wife was slowly rearranging around him, and he did not press play. The next morning, Sophia found me before I'd finished my coffee. He gave the lawyer new instructions last night, she said. Told him to try a different angle. Said there had to be a way in. She, I corrected gently. Eleanor. Eleanor, Sophia agreed. The lawyer went quiet again. Then he said he'd look. He won't find anything. But he'll look, which means more inquiries, which means more record. I turned my cup a slow half-turn on the saucer. She's not stopping, I said. No, Sophia said. And that was the thing we both understood without saying, standing in the good light of a house that answered to me. A person who cannot find the door will eventually try the window, and the window is where people fall. Part 4. The signature. I wasn't at the dinner. I've never needed to be in a room to know exactly how Eleanor feels it. She'd stopped trying to climb the wall by then. When the legal route went quiet, she did the smart thing, which is the thing that has always worked for her. She stopped chasing the assets and went straight for the man whose name is on the door. My father is a much easier lock than a trust. He wants to be opened. So she made him a dinner. Not the big room, the small one, the one with the good light and only 2 chairs. Candles. The staff sent away early. A bottle already breathing on the sideboard when he came down, because Eleanor has never in her life poured a glass of wine by accident. Sit, she told him, taking his coat herself. Tonight it's just us. No house, no calls, just you and me and something worth drinking. My father, who had spent 2 years being a widower and 1 month being flattered, sat. They ate slowly. She asked him about the version of himself he liked best, the young man, the one from before the money got complicated, before my mother, before me. He told the old stories. She laughed in the right places and touched his hand at the ends of them, and let a silence sit now and then so he'd feel the weight of being listened to. He told her about the first building he ever bought, a wreck on the north side he'd fixed with his own 2 hands and a loan no sensible bank should have given him. He told her about being 26 and certain and completely broke. You did all of that yourself, she said, leaning in like it was the most interesting thing she'd heard in years. Before any of them, before the name meant a single thing. Before it meant anything, he agreed. He liked that. He liked being the man who built it, rather than the man who spends his later years just trying not to lose it. She'd found the soft place in about 40 minutes, and it wasn't the money, it was the wish. Every wealthy man over 60 carries the same quiet wish, to be loved for the version of himself that existed before the wealth, the one who was interesting on his own. She handed it to him across a candle like a gift she'd been saving. After that, he'd have signed a mortgage on the moon somewhere between the cheese and the dessert. You know what I love about this house, she said, somewhere past the second glass? It could be a home again, not a museum, a place where a family actually built something, together. It is a home, he said. It's yours, she said gently. I live in it. There's a difference, David. I feel it every day, little things, like I'm a very welcome guest who happens to share your bed. He reached across the table. Don't say that. This is your home too. Is it? She smiled, sad and lovely. Then let me feel like it. That's all I want, to feel like this is really ours. And Caleb? He said once, a small cloud drifting across the good evening. He worries about arrangements. He always has. He loves you, she said, generous and forgiving and absolutely magnificent about it. In his own way. It's all right, David. Not everyone has to be happy for us at the same speed. She talked up his glass and the cloud moved along, because she is very, very good at weather. That's the whole art of her, right there. She never asks for the thing. She asks to feel a certain way and lets the man decide, all by himself, to hand her the thing that produces the feeling. By the time he's signing, he thinks it was his idea. He thinks he's being generous. The Bordeaux did the rest. Dessert came, something she'd had made, because of course she had, and beside her plate, as if it had wandered in on its own, was a slim folder. She didn't push it across the table, she just set her hand on it, lightly, the way you rest a hand on something you're a little shy about. I had the bank draw up some paperwork, she said, a joint account, nothing dramatic. I hate feeling like I have to ask, for a hair appointment, for flowers for your own dining room. A small laugh at herself. I want to contribute, David. I want us to be a we, not a you and a me who visits. He opened the folder. He read it the way a happy man reads anything at the end of a good night, with his eyes, not his lawyer's. Here is the part that matters, the part I keep coming back to. He had a son 1 floor up who had begged him, twice, in plain words, to let someone look at exactly this kind of paper before he signed it. He had a voicemail on his phone with an unheard dot beside it saying the same thing. He did not call me. He did not call his lawyers. He did not so much as pause over the dessert. He signed, both pages, his own good pen. Then he folded the documents in half and he tucked them into the inside breast pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, the way you'd carry something precious home through the cold. And he patted the pocket once, a small, satisfied pat, the pat of a man who believes he has just done something loving. That pat is the sound of a door closing on an option he didn't know he was holding open. And here's the thing he couldn't see, and she couldn't see, and only 2 people in the whole city could. That signature didn't buy Eleanor access. It bought her a date. A dated, witnessed, voluntarily signed document, sitting in a sequence, the card she tried to add, the lawyer she sent digging, and now this. Line them up in order and they stop looking like a wife settling in. They start looking like a plan, a slow, patient, extremely well-documented plan. She thought she was collecting keys. She was signing a confession, one romantic evening at a time, and mailing a copy to the only woman in the world who kept a file. There, he said, warm and a little proud. Ours. Ours, she agreed, and lifted her glass, and her eyes over the rim were as warm as a photograph of a fire. He left near midnight, glowing. She walked him to the door herself, and he kissed her there like a man 20 years younger, and told her it had been the best evening he could remember, and meant it. The door closed, and Eleanor turned back into the room, and for one moment, the only honest moment of the whole night, the warmth came off her face like a coat coming off a hook. She looked at the empty dessert plates and the breathing bottle, and she did not smile. She picked up the good glass, considered it, and finished what was left of his wine. I've thought about that glass more than I should. Of everything she did that evening, that's the detail that stays with me. Not the folder, not the pen. The way a person drinks the last of a man's wine the moment he's gone, alone, without tasting it, as though the pouring had been the only part that ever meant anything to her. Somewhere across town, Julian was making his own small contribution to the evening. He'd been at a party in Eleanor's new orbit, the kind of party I used to get invited to, back when people thought I was a person worth inviting. He was comfortable there. Julian is always comfortable wherever the warmth is. It's his one real talent. Someone at the party got curious about me, the way people do about a man who's fallen off the guest lists. You and Caleb were close once, weren't you? They asked him. We were, Julian said, easy, swirling a drink he hadn't paid for. Good guy. Bit lost these days, honestly. It's sad. The family stuff got complicated and he sort of retreated. You know how it goes. He said it kindly. That's the part I keep. Not cruelly, not with a knife, kindly. The exact gentle tone you use to retire a man you've quietly decided is finished. He'd already filed me under former, and he was being generous about it, and generosity from Julian has always been the most expensive thing he gives, because it means he's moved on. Then someone posted a photo from the estate dinner, my father and Eleanor, candlelit, radiant, the picture of a marriage working. And Julian, glass in hand, decided to help. He shared it, added a few warm words underneath, so happy for these two, love seeing good people find each other, that flavor of thing. Public. His name, his face, right beside hers, for anyone who cared to look. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to the party, having just made a choice he'd spend a great deal of part 8 wishing he could unmake. He didn't feel it as a choice. That's how the expensive ones always feel, like nothing, like a click. I saw the post the next morning. Someone always makes sure you see the post. He's where he thinks the access is, I said, to no one, and put the phone face down on the counter and got on with the coffee. The kitchen is the one room in this house that has never pretended to be anything. Morning light, a good machine, the smell of it starting. This is my ground. Eleanor can have the dining room, the candles, the whole theater of the place. I'll take the room where the food actually comes from. My father came in while the machine was still going, wearing yesterday's good mood like a shirt he'd slept in. He was looking for coffee, and I think for a little more of the feeling he'd gone to bed with. Morning, he seemed almost shy about being happy in front of me. It was a good night last night, a really good one. I heard. I reached down a second cup. You signed something. He paused, just slightly. How do you... Then he let it go, because letting things go had become the entire architecture of his month. A joint account. It's completely normal, Caleb. Married people have joint accounts. You didn't call the lawyers. I didn't need a lawyer to have dinner with my wife. A flake of irritation now, floating up through the warmth. Not everything is a transaction. Some things are, I said, and slid the cup across to him. You just don't always get to pick which ones. He looked at me a long moment, and I watched him choose, in real time, the way you can actually see it happen on a face, to be hurt instead of curious. You know what your problem is, he said. You can't stand that I found someone. Yes, she's ambitious. I knew that walking in. Ambition is a quality, Caleb. Your mother had it in spades. You'd remember that if you ever wanted anything in life besides being right. That one landed exactly where he aimed it. I'll give him that much. He still knows the soft places. He just spends them on the wrong wars. Enjoy the coffee, I said. He took it and left, and I let him, because there is no version of that argument I win by continuing it. You can't lawyer a man out of a feeling. You can only wait for the feeling to send him a bill. The phone rang while the machine was still working. One name. He signed the joint account document, Sophia said. When? Last night. Entry 5 is logged, time-stamped. Edit, I said, though I knew she already had. Sophia logs things before I finish asking her to. Asking is just my way of being polite about it. I watched the coffee come down. I did not raise my voice. There was nothing to raise it about. A man had signed a piece of paper on a night arranged to make signing feel like romance. It was the most predictable thing that had happened all month. I noticed my own hands while I poured. Steady. I've worked on that for years. When I was younger, I used to shake when I was angry, and Eleanor, back when she still had access to me, learned to read the tremor like a stock ticker, buying and selling against it. So I trained it out of myself, deliberately, the way you'd retrain a signature. Now the worst my hands do when I'm furious is pour an unusually even cup of coffee. She'd hate how still they've become. She'd take it personally, and she'd be right to. She used the Bordeaux, I said. I should have seen that coming. She always used the Bordeaux when she needed someone to sign something. The 2012 for the small asks, the 98 for the ones she really needed. I once watched her open a 2009 to get a credit card limit raised. I poured the first cup. She's escalating. She used the 98, Sophia said, flat as a table. Of course she did. I let that sit and drank some of the coffee and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief. My father had carried her paperwork home against his heart. There's a joke in there somewhere. I decided not to go looking for it today. She's moving faster than I expected, Sophia said. Then we may need to accelerate. Or, Sophia said, let her run. I stood in my kitchen with a good cup in my hand and thought about a woman upstairs building a case against herself, one confident signature at a time, and a wall she couldn't see, and the specific place where the two of them were going to meet. Let her run, I said. A held beat. The machine ticked as it cooled. What's the close status? I asked. Ready, Sophia said. When she is. Part 5. The Folder. Eleanor filed the transfer on a Tuesday afternoon, alone at her desk, in about the time it takes to order a pair of shoes. She'd decided the slow route was beneath her. The lawyer was stalled, the accounts were walled, but she had a joint account now, signed and sealed and patted into my father's breast pocket, and in her mind that was the master key to the whole building, so she used it. The portfolio transfer form was already prepared. Her lawyer had drawn it up just in case, which is the phrase people use when they've already decided and want to sound like they haven't. She read it once. She exhaled, not nervous, satisfied, the long exhale of a woman finally moving a thing that had spent 5 months refusing to move for her. She clicked submit. There, she said, to the empty room. A confirmation screen bloomed and faded. She closed the laptop. Done. She went to check her hair because the family dinner was that evening. She'd arranged it herself, and she wanted the whole room to see her at the head of the table on the night she finally took hold of the estate. She'd even built the menu around the mood. Something celebratory, something with a very good dessert. She had the day exactly right. She'd just gotten the direction backwards. Across the city, a notification landed on Sophia's screen a little under a minute later. She looked at it the way you look at a float that has finally gone under. No drama, no triumph, just confirmation that the thing you baited the water for has arrived. She picked up her phone and made one call. She wrote a single line in a file that was already long. Then she reached for her coat. Because a clause is only a sentence on a page until someone does the exact thing it was written to catch. Eleanor had just done it. She had hunted the trigger for months, sent lawyers after it, lost sleep over it, and in the end, she pulled it herself, with a satisfied little exhale, on a Tuesday, and went to fix her hair. An hour before the dinner she'd arranged to celebrate herself, I was in the kitchen, eating her dessert. Penelope had made a tarte tatin. Penelope runs the household staff, and on the nights that matter, she bakes it herself, because she doesn't trust anyone else with the caramel, and she's never once been wrong about that. She cut me a slice standing up at the counter, the way she's done since I was a boy who wasn't tall enough to see the top of the stove. "Big night out there," she said. She didn't make it a question. "Apparently," I said. She slid the plate an inch closer. "Eat. You always forget to when you're waiting on something." I ate it. It was perfect. I want that on the record, because in about 90 minutes, it was going to become the loneliest dessert in the county, and somebody in this story should say a kind word over it. The dining room was full for the first time in a long while. Eleanor had invited people. My father's sister, a couple of his oldest friends, Julian, of course. A scattering of the kind of guests whose only real job at a dinner is to have been there. She'd set the evening like a coronation. She wanted witnesses for the night she became, finally and visibly, the Lady of Ashworth Estate. She was at the head of the table, naturally. She wore the confidence the way she wore the dress, chosen, fitted, expensive, and not quite hers. I sat at the far end, ate my soup, and looked at the middle distance, which is my favorite view and my best work. To be precise about it, I was looking at the portrait over the sideboard. My mother, painted the year she quietly built the wall that none of these people could see. She had a wonderful face for keeping a secret, still, warm, giving away nothing. I learned most of what I know from that face. I was looking at her and not at Eleanor on purpose all night. My father sat at Eleanor's right, and something in him was wound a half-turn too tight. He laughed at the right moments, but a bit late every time, like a man dubbing his own life in a language he was still learning. He knew Sophia had been invited. He knew it hadn't been Eleanor who'd invited her. He didn't know what that meant yet. But his body had started to suspect, and his hand had found his water glass. Julian was 3 seats down, warm and loose, telling some story with both hands. He was Eleanor's guest. He had no idea he was sitting inside a building that was already, quietly, on fire. Early in the meal, Eleanor rose and lifted her glass. "To family," she said, warm eyes moving around the table she believed she had just finished buying. "To building something that lasts." The guests murmured it back. My father beamed like a boy. I raised my glass the requisite half-inch and drank to a sentence that was, in fact, about to come true, just not in the direction she was pointing it. Then Sophia came in. She didn't apologize for arriving late, because she wasn't late. She was exactly on time, in the particular way that only she is ever allowed to be. She didn't greet the table. She crossed to it, set a plain folder down on the white cloth beside Eleanor's plate, and sat. "Sophia." Eleanor's smile arrived bright and instant, hostess to the last cell. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," Sophia said, and then she said nothing else, and the plain folder sat there on the white cloth being, by a wide margin, the loudest object in the room. Eleanor looked at it. She looked down the table at me. I was looking at the middle distance. So she did what she has always done with a locked thing in front of her. She reached out and opened it. She opened the folder the way you open anything at your own celebration, lightly, expecting a gift. The first page was a single document. She read the top of it. I happen to know the exact words at the top of it because I've read them more times than I've read anything else in my life. Ashworth Family Trust, beneficial owner. And then a name, and it was not my father's, it was mine. Below that, near the founding date, there was a signature in a hand I still recognize on sight, my mother's, from a year when her hand was still steady. And my father's name appeared once, in the only place it appears on anything that actually matters. One word beside it, nominee. Eleanor did not gasp. I will give her this for the rest of my life. She did not gasp. She read the page from top to bottom, once, at her own pace. Her face did something very small and very expensive to keep small. Then she set the page down on the cloth, squared its edge with 2 fingers, and looked up. She looked at my father first. He couldn't meet it. She looked at me. I was still watching the middle distance, where the good work gets done. We've been documenting every financial move made against this estate, Sophia said into the silence, since the 17th day of this marriage. She did not raise her voice, and she did not look pleased, which is worse. This afternoon, there was a transfer request. My father's sister gave a small nervous laugh, the kind that's really a question wearing a coat. I'm sorry, David, what is she talking about? My father opened his mouth. For the first time in his charmed, comfortable, tastefully decorated life, nothing came out of it. He closed it again. His hand was still around the water glass. It had been since Sophia walked through the door. He never once lifted it. That full glass sat in front of him for the rest of the night, like a small, clear monument to everything he had chosen not to know. Nominee. It's a clean little word. It means, your name goes here, so someone else's doesn't have to. It means you were the face, and never once the hand. My father had spent 30 years being introduced as the man who built the Ashworth estate, and the single truest document in the whole house had always described him, in one word, as a warm place to keep a signature. He was learning that now. At dinner. At 61. From a folder his wife had opened expecting a gift. Julian had stopped telling his story somewhere in the last minute. He was watching Eleanor's face, then the page, then Eleanor's face, trying to read the document upside down from 3 seats away, and slowly, horribly understanding that whatever it said, he had publicly, cheerfully, permanently stapled his name to the wrong end of it. Down the length of the table, the other guests had gone the specific quiet of people who don't have the document but can absolutely read the room. My father's oldest friend set his fork down without letting it make a sound. A chair creaked somewhere and then seemed to apologize for it. Nobody asked the obvious question out loud. Whose house is this really? Because the obvious question had just been answered in a folder. And every person there had felt the answer land in their chest, even without reading a single word of it. Eleanor turned to the second page. She's brave. I've never said she wasn't. Nobody turns to the second page of a thing like that unless they're brave, or they're already falling and would simply like to see the ground coming. The second page was the clause. Clause 7, Sophia said. It activated this afternoon, 4:11. She laid one more sheet on top, a confirmation, a timestamp, the clean set of fingerprints Eleanor had pressed into her own undoing. You'll want your own lawyer to read it before you do anything at all. I'd have wanted mine too. Eleanor looked at the timestamp, 4:11, the exhale, the satisfied little there in an empty room. She was looking at the precise minute she had handed me everything, wearing the memory of it as the minute she took it. And then she said the only thing she said at that table all night. The same 2 words she'd said months ago in a service corridor, the first time this house declined to move for her. I see, she said. That was the most frightening thing she did all evening. Not tears, not a scene. 2 syllables and a squared page. A woman reading, in real time, the exact document that erases her at a table she had personally filled with an audience for the opposite occasion and choosing, visibly, with effort you could see, to stay in her chair. I'd half forgotten she could do that. It's the thing that used to scare me about her, back when I loved her instead of watching her. Eleanor doesn't fall apart. She recalculates. Even now I could see her doing the sum, under the ruin, looking for the version of tomorrow where this was survivable. And into that silence, that total, flawless, decades of social capital silence, Penelope arrived with dessert. She set the tarte tatin down in the center of the table, on the good stand, still, faintly warm. She smiled the calm, complete smile of a woman who runs a household, has served a great many dinners, and fully intends to serve a great many more, under management she has clearly already thought about. Then she left. Nobody moved toward it. Nobody was ever going to move toward it. It sat there, golden and perfect and entirely alone, the single most beautiful thing on a table full of people who had just lost their appetites at different speeds, for different reasons. The tarte tatin was excellent. The pastry alone was worth the evening. I know this because I'd had a slice in the kitchen an hour before, standing at the counter with Penelope before any of this began. No one at that table would ever know that. Or, I suspect, the tarte tatin. What followed wasn't really a dinner, because a dinner needs people eating, and what we had instead was 7 adults and a folder quietly getting older in a beautiful room. My father's sister rose first, making the small, apologetic sounds people make when a floor gives way politely. The other guests followed her out in ones and twos, each arriving at the private understanding that there was no version of staying that wasn't unbearable. Julian went with them. He did not look at me on his way past. He'd have needed to build an entirely new face to manage it, and there simply wasn't time. I'd known Julian 25 years. He walked out of my family's dinner without a word, trailing after a woman who'd just been handed her own eviction, because even now, even in the wreck of it, the warmth in the room was still on her side of the table, and warmth is the only compass he has ever carried. I didn't hate him for it. You can't hate a thermometer for the weather. My father did not leave. He sat with his full glass and his emptied mouth in front of a page that carried his whole life in the smallest, saddest word available to it. I felt the cost of that. I've been dry about most of this, so let me be plain about one thing. Watching my father learn, at his own table, in front of his own sister, that the ground he'd stood on for years had been a stage my mother built to keep him from falling, that was not free. I paid for it. I just pay the way I pay for everything. Quietly, in full, without showing the receipt. At the very end of it, Eleanor and I were the only two people still seated, the whole length of the table between us, the open folder between us, the entire marriage between us. She looked at me, and for the first time since a wedding I'd watched from the edge of the room, I looked back. I met her eyes, and I held them, and I said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing left in me that she still had the right to hear. She held the look. Then, calm, unhurried, almost graceful about it, she slid the phone from her lap, kept it below the edge of the table, and began to type. She was composing a caption. 12 minutes into the end of her entire world, she was already drafting the version where she was the one it had been done to. I had to admire the reflexes. Somewhere in the house, a clause had shut like a door, and Eleanor, God help her, was already reaching for the internet, for the one room in the world that had never once asked to see her paperwork. Part 6. The caption. Eleanor didn't cry that night, and she didn't call her lawyer, because her lawyer had stopped taking her calls somewhere between the folder and the second page. A careful man knows when a client has become weather. So she did the thing she's actually best at. By morning, she had washed her face, found her light, and built a story. She'd done versions of this before, for smaller wounds. Eleanor has always understood something most people never learn. The public doesn't want the truth. It wants a shape it recognizes. Villain, victim, betrayal, courage. Hand the crowd those 4 pieces in the right order, and it will assemble your innocence for you, for free, and then defend it against anyone who shows up later holding a document. It was a good story. I want to be fair to it because I'm about to enjoy watching it die. In her version, she was a woman who had loved an older man honestly, married him with an open heart, and walked straight into an ambush, a cold, calculating stepson, and a legal fiction of a trust designed to humiliate her, to strip a grieving wife of her dignity, to make her a stranger in her own marriage. There's a genuine art to it. She didn't name me, she didn't rage. She made herself small and warm and wronged, the exact shape a crowd loves to defend. She wrote the post herself. She composed it the way a surgeon works. I've watched her do it before, years ago, over smaller things. She writes a sentence and cuts it, writes it warmer, cuts a word. She reads it aloud to an empty room to hear exactly where a stranger's breath will catch, and then she engineers the catch. She chose a photograph where the light did the crying for her, so the words wouldn't have to lift a finger. That's the whole craft, and it's a real one. She never cries in the picture. She just builds a room precisely the right shape for your tears and steps back and lets you feel it. A little after 9 that morning, she posted it and sat back and waited for the internet to do the thing it does best, which is arrive somewhere long before it thinks. For 3 hours, it worked. I know it worked because I was watching it work, at home, in a chair, with a cup of coffee going cold in a way I'd normally have prevented. I don't respond to these things. I've never once left a comment on anything in my life. But I watched. The numbers climbed. The warm ones, the heart, the crying face, the strangers writing paragraphs to a woman they'd never met about how brave she was, how sorry they were, how families like ours were the real rot. Her phone must have been a small hot animal in her hand. She tapped a nerve, and the nerve was paying out. This is the part people get wrong about a crowd. It isn't cruel, and it isn't kind. It's fast. It arrives at a feeling long before it arrives at a fact, and then it experiences the feeling as knowledge. By 10 in the morning, 10,000 people were completely certain they knew exactly what had happened inside my family. Not one of them had seen a single page of any of it. Certainty is very cheap when somebody hands you the shape for free. Her allies came out for her. One of them called her, I only know because Sophia knows the shape of everything, and Eleanor took it in her wronged woman voice, the one with the little catch in it. No, I'm okay, she said. I just couldn't stay silent. Not about this. People should know what really happens behind these families. You're so brave, the friend said. Everyone's saying it. I don't feel brave, Eleanor said. which is the single bravest sounding sentence in the English language, and she knew it when she said it. People asked me afterward why I didn't do something that morning. Say a word, post a line, defend myself. My name was being quietly set on fire in front of 100,000 strangers, and I sat in a chair and let a cup of coffee die. But you do not put out this kind of fire by shouting into it. Shout, and the crowd simply eats you too, and enjoys the second course more than the first. You wait. You let the fire get big and bright and certain of itself, and then, at the exact right moment, you hand it the one thing a fire can't burn, which is a date. Julian shared it. Of course he did. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask a question, didn't wait a decent hour. He reshared her post to his own following with a few warm words on top, standing with a good person going through something hard, that register, and put his name and his face on it in public. Again, for the second time in a week, on the wrong side of a story that had a document in its future. And my father read it. He opened the app the way he does everything now, carefully, like the phone might bite. He read her 43 words, and for a moment, I believed this completely. He wanted it to be true. He wanted the version where he wasn't a nominee, where his wife was a victim and not an event, where the last month could be somebody else's fault. He'd spent that whole month building small, comfortable rooms in his mind he wouldn't have to look inside. Her post was the largest and best decorated room yet, and it had a door he could walk through and simply never come back out of. For about 3 hours, he stood in that doorway with his hand on the frame. He called her. "Is this true?" he asked. "What you wrote? Is that how it happened?" "David." Her voice went soft and hurt and perfect. "You were there. You saw what they did to me at that table, in front of your own sister. Do you really think I planned that?" A pause on his end, the pause of a drowning man being handed a story shaped like a raft. "No," he said. "No."
Of course not.
Then he opened her post again, and his thumb drifted over the share button, and he held it there, one press away from putting his name beside hers in front of everyone he knew. He didn't press it. He looked at the screen a while longer. Then he set the phone down on the desk, face up this time. For a month, that phone had gone face down every time it frightened him. Now it lay there, face up, screen bright, the post still open, and my father just let himself keep seeing it. Screen up was new. It was the smallest thing. It was everything. 3 hours in, the post was still climbing, Julian's share was still spreading, and Eleanor was still winning. That was the exact moment my phone lit up with one name and a message 4 words long. Document ready. Release? I looked at the cold coffee and the warm lie and the whole bright machine of public sympathy running at full speed in the wrong direction. I'll give her this before I ended it. She'd written a genuinely excellent post. 43 words, 2 M dashes, one strategically vulnerable line break right where the eye falls. She tagged it as a personal update rather than a statement, which is the difference between a woman sharing her heart and a party issuing a defense. The algorithm adored it. The comments ran warm for approximately 3 hours, which, in fairness to the post, is a good deal longer than I expected. I actually considered, for 1 weak second, telling her it was good work. Then I remembered we don't speak anymore, and that the kindest thing I had left to send her was a silence and a date. I typed one word back, release. That was the whole of my public campaign. One word to one person from a chair. There's a temptation in a moment like that, and I felt it, to do more. To release the whole file, 6 months of her, every inquiry and probe and signature, dated and undeniable, dumped into the daylight until she drowned in the sheer weight of it. I could have. Sophia had it ready, the log is not shallow. But a person buried under 50 documents becomes sympathetic again. The crowd starts to feel the pile itself is the cruelty, and forgets what's printed on it. 1 document is a fact. 50 documents is a vendetta, and I have never once wanted to be a man with a vendetta. I only wanted to be a man with a receipt. Restraint like that isn't mercy, and I won't dress it up as mercy. It's arithmetic. A crowd will forgive a woman it pities far faster than it will forgive a man it fears, and the quickest way to turn Eleanor back into someone worth pitying would have been to hit her too hard. So I didn't. I let 1 true sentence do the work 100 angry ones would only have undone. The cruelest thing you can do to a person who is counting on your cruelty is to be precise instead. Sophia didn't hold a press conference. She didn't write a statement or a thread or a rebuttal. She put 1 document into the same public air Eleanor had spent all morning heating up, attached one line of context, and pressed a single key. The document was plain. Her name, Eleanor's, in full. Her signature. A dated request to pull $40,000 out of the household accounts filed 17 days after she married my father. 17 days. Not 17 months, not after some slow disillusionment. 17 days into loving him, she'd reached for the money and she'd signed her name to the reaching. The line of context under it read, in full, for reference. That was it. That was the entire counterstrike. No adjectives. 2 words and a date do not argue with you. They just sit there and are true. I didn't watch the comments turn. The card on that was clear in my own head before Sophia ever wrote it. You don't watch the crowd. You watch the face. And her face, I heard about her face, did something it hadn't done at the dinner table, hadn't done through the folder or the clause or the word nominee. At the table she'd stayed sealed. But sealed is a thing you hold against a room of 7. You cannot hold it against 10,000 strangers arriving at the same conclusion in real time. She saw a new comment, then another. She read one, then a second, and then she stopped reading, because the direction had changed, and you only need to feel a current change once to know you're now swimming the wrong way in it. I'm told it moved through in waves, the way these things always do. First the mockery, quick and cheap and delighted with itself. Then the doubt, thousands of people quietly editing the certainty they'd felt an hour before. Then the whole pylon turning around and coming back the other way with interest, because a crowd that decides it's been tricked is far meaner than a crowd that was never fooled in the first place. The same machine that spent 3 hours building her a monument spent the 4th hour tearing it down for parts, and felt exactly as righteous doing the second thing as the first. She went to the document, she read the date, she read it again. 17 days. Her own signature under it, in her own confident hand. She set the phone down, she didn't throw it, she didn't scream. I keep waiting, in my memory of all of this, for the scene where Eleanor finally breaks, and it keeps refusing to come, and that refusal is the truest portrait of her I own. She set the phone down, and she sat very still, and somewhere behind her eyes she was already running the arithmetic one more time. What's left? Who's left? Which door hasn't been tried yet? She had exactly 1 door left, and she'd spent the entire day making every other one impossible to open. Julian felt the turn from wherever Julian was. His share of her post was still up, still public, still carrying his name and his face on a story a document had just walked through. He did not delete it. Deleting is an admission, and Julian never admits, he only relocates. He set his phone face down, the same gesture my father made in a study months ago. Julia's version of the same small surrender. The phone turned over, the problem hidden under a rectangle of glass, the warmth he'd bet on going cold in his hand. He didn't call me, he didn't call her. He just went quiet, the way a room goes quiet, and quiet is where Julian will now live for a while. He'd spent his entire life being early to the warm side of every room. He'd finally been early to the wrong one, in writing, in public, with a timestamp of his own now. And I didn't have to do a single thing to him. The document did it, and the crowd did it, and the small permanent fact of his own name beside hers did it. That's the cleanest justice there is, the kind you never have to lift a hand for. Across the city, at the far end of the day, Eleanor did the only thing she had left to do. She called my father. I picture it plainly, because it's the hinge of everything that comes next. His phone, on the desk, face up now, her name, filling the screen, the way it had filled his whole foolish happy month. He looked at it. He did not answer. The phone rang out, a pause, then her name again. She'd called straight back, because Eleanor does not accept a ringing phone as an answer any more than she accepts a wall as a wall. He let it ring. He watched her name light up and go dark, light up and go dark, and he left his hand flat on the desk beside it and did not pick it up. A month ago, he'd have lunged for that phone, answered on the first ring, apologized for the ringing, rearranged his whole evening around whatever she needed. That was the man she married, the one who came when called, every time, gratefully. She was calling that man now, over and over, and learning, ring by ring, that she had used him all the way up to the end of him. He didn't answer. That was new. Part 7. The Apple. I wasn't in the room for this one. I've had to build it afterward, from the pieces my father carried out of it and the ones Sophia caught through the door of what happened next. But I know Eleanor's rhythms better than I know my own, so let me tell you how it went, and you can trust that it's close. She asked to see him. He agreed. And here's the first thing that mattered, before either of them said a word. They met in his study, his room. Not the dining room she tried to reconfigure, not any stage she controlled. She came to him, on his ground, which meant she already understood she was the one asking. She was, by every account, magnificent. She didn't cry when she came in. She didn't perform grief at the door. She sat down across from a tired man in his own chair, and she told him a story with just enough truth in it to float all the rest. "I know how this looks," she said. "I know what that document says, and I know exactly what your son wants you to believe about me. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I did everything right, because I didn't." That's the move. She confessed to a small crime in order to be acquitted of the large one. "I moved too fast with the money. I did, and I'm ashamed of it." She let it sit, unhurried. "Do you want to know why? Because I've been poor, David, really poor. The kind that gets into your bones and never fully washes out. And I married the man I love into a life that finally felt safe, and some frightened, ugly part of me needed to know the door wouldn't lock behind me. That isn't a scheme, that's a scar." It's a good speech. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to pretend it was obvious nonsense, and it wasn't. Half of it was even true. She had been poor, the scar is real. She'd simply learned to aim it at whatever she wanted, like a little laser she keeps in her purse. He listened. He didn't interrupt. "My father is a great many things, but cold has never been one of them, and a woman he loves telling him quietly that she's frightened is precisely the shape of key that's been cut for his particular lock. You were so alone when I met you," she went on, and here her voice did something very careful. "You'd stopped even pretending to eat dinner. You told me once, do you remember, that the worst part of losing her wasn't the grief, it was the silence at the table every night. Well, I filled that table, David. Whatever else I did, whatever that folder says I am, I filled it. And now you're going to let a piece of paper tell you that was all a performance?" That one nearly did it. I know it nearly did it, because it's the truest thing she said the entire night, and the true things are the only things that cut my father all the way to the bone. He told her about the silence at the table. He'd never told me that. He'd handed her the softest thing he owned, in some quiet hour I wasn't in the room for, and she was spending it now, coin by coin, to buy her own way out. And for a moment, Sophia, who'd arrived early, caught the shape of it through the door. His hand actually moved. Started to cross the small distance between their two chairs. A month of loneliness and one genuinely good speech will move a man's hand a long way toward the thing that's hurting him. "I'm not asking you to fight your son," she said, reading that hand, pressing on it the way she reads and presses everything. "I would never ask you to choose. I'm just asking you not to let them erase me. Stand next to me on Friday, that's all. Let the room see that you still choose me, and this stops being a slaughter and turns back into a marriage having one very hard year." It was, tactically, close to perfect. She didn't ask him to attack me. She asked only that he stand still beside her, in public, the smallest possible act, the one a decent man could tell himself was loyalty instead of war. And she was right about the effect. If my father had stood up on Friday and put his arm around her in front of that room, he'd have muddied every clean line Sophia had spent months drawing. A husband's public support turns a legal fact into a family dispute, and family disputes don't have winners, only sides. He opened his mouth. I believe, for half a second, he was going to give it to her. "I didn't marry you for a trust I didn't even know existed," she said, softer now. "I married you because when I'm with you, I'm not the girl I used to be, and now your son is going to stand up in front of everyone at that gathering and turn one scared, stupid decision into a case, and take it all, and I'll be nothing again." Her voice didn't break. She was better than breaking. "Is that the man you raised, David? Is that really who you want to be married into?" And then she gave him the line, the one she'd built the whole room toward. "Say something," she said. "Please, just say something." And my father was quiet. I'm told the pause went on a long time, longer than a pause has any business going. Long enough that she let herself start to believe in it, and I know she did, because I know her, and Eleanor can feel a room begin to tilt her way the way old sailors feel the weather change in a knee. But my father wasn't wavering. My father was doing arithmetic. Because he'd read the documents before he ever agreed to see her, all of them, in order, the card 17 days in, the lawyer's quiet probes, the signature he'd folded so proudly into his own breast pocket, the transfer and the date on it. He'd sat alone with the whole sequence laid out one item under the next, and my father can hide from a truth for a month, but he cannot unread a calendar. He finally knew what "I moved too fast with the money" actually meant. He knew what he'd chosen not to know on a terrace on his wedding night, with his son standing right there offering him the chance. So when the long pause ended, he said the 6 words that ended everything with it. "I need to call Sophia." He stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her, didn't weep, didn't ask her how she could. He just stood up and set the whole last month down like a coat that had never once fit him and walked to the door. He didn't say goodbye. He closed it gently behind him. And for one moment, before she rebuilt her face, Eleanor sat alone in my father's study and let it show. Not grief, exactly. Recalculation. The specific, terrible stillness of a woman counting the assets she has left and arriving, for the first time in her life, at a number very close to zero. She didn't cry then either. Crying is for an audience, and the room was empty. She sat in his chair, the one seat in this whole house she'd never once bothered to want, and she planned. Because that is the frightening, almost admirable engine at the center of her. Even at zero, even alone, Eleanor does not grieve a lost position. She goes looking for the next one. And there was still Friday. There was still going to be a room full of people. And Eleanor has always been at her most dangerous with a room full of people to play. I was in the kitchen when he came through. I usually am. It's where I keep myself when something that matters is happening in a room I've chosen to stay out of. The coffee was going. He came in from the direction of his study and stopped when he saw me, and I stopped what I was doing, and for a moment we just looked at each other across a kitchen we'd stood in together 10,000 times, back in the years when he'd have shouted across a crowded room to find me. Neither of us said a word. There wasn't a word that would have survived being spoken. I looked at my father, and my father looked at me, and I watched him understand, right there, in real time, over a coffee machine, that the quiet, disappointing son he'd spent a whole year looking straight past had been the thing standing between him and the drop the entire time. It is a strange experience watching a man realize he was wrong about you at the exact moment it stops being useful to either of you. There was an apology somewhere in that look. I didn't reach out and take it. Some apologies you let a man keep in his pocket, because making him say it out loud would cost him the last thing he has left, and I'd taken enough off him this month already. Then he crossed to the bowl on the counter, and he took an apple, and he left. He took the apple. Good sign. My father only takes fruit when he's thinking. Genuinely thinking. The kind of thinking that moves something that can be moved back. He took an apple the morning before he signed the prenuptial agreement with wife number 1. He took one the afternoon he closed the Singapore deal, standing in this exact kitchen, turning it over in his hand like a man weighing a whole country. He took one the day my mother died. Walked in, took an apple from the bowl, carried it out to the garden, and stood there holding it and not eating it until well after the light was gone. I've never once eaten an apple since without checking his hands first. I should have been keeping a separate log all these years just for the apples. God knows I've kept a meticulous one for everything else. I'll say one thing here that isn't useful, and I prefer useful things, so bear with me. Watching my father walk out of that kitchen with an apple he had no intention of eating, I did not feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd just handed a man back a truth I'd been carrying for him for years, at his request mostly, and the truth was heavier than either of us had bargained for, and now he had to carry it the rest of the way by himself. That's what all of this has felt like, the whole time. Not victory, handing someone a weight and watching their needs take it. Sophia asked me once, early on, whether I was sure I wanted to do it the slow way, the way that ran straight through my father's dignity like a road cut through a field. There was a faster route. There's always a faster route. I could have gone to him in the first month with the whole file and forced it and spared everyone the year. I told her no. A truth a man is forced to swallow, he throws back up at the first chance. A truth he walks all the way to himself, on his own legs, at his own ruinous pace. That one he keeps. She said that was either wisdom or cowardice wearing patience's coat, and she wasn't certain which. Neither was I. He didn't come back to talk to me. That isn't how we work now, maybe not how we'll ever work again. He went to his study and he made a call, and I know exactly who he called, because there was only one person left in the world he could. Sophia picked up on the first ring. She'd been ready for that call longer than my father had been alive to the idea of making it. "Tell me what I need to sign," he said. "I'll bring it tonight," Sophia said. That was the entire conversation. She'd known his words before he did. That's the thing nobody ever quite understands about Sophia and me. We didn't beat Eleanor. We were never really even fighting her. We built one true thing, years ago, in an office, with my mother's steady hand on it, and then we waited, patiently, for everyone else to arrive at it in their own time and at their own speed. My father took the longest of anyone. He always does. But he got there in the end, in his own study, with an apple going soft in his hand and a lawyer on the line already reaching for a pen she'd been holding for a decade. Julian, out in whatever orbit he'd chosen over me, had gone silent. Not one post in Eleanor's direction for a full day, which for Julian is very nearly a scream. He hadn't apologized. He never will. He'd simply, quietly, stopped standing wherever the heat used to be, the way he leaves every cooling room, without a word, checking first that no one's watching the door. I'd stopped thinking of Julian as a betrayal somewhere around the second week. Betrayal requires that a person chose you first. Julian never chose me. He chose the temperature of whatever room I happened to be standing in, and for 25 years, my rooms happened to be warm. Now they weren't, and he drifted off toward the next warm one, and calling that a betrayal gives it more of a spine than it has ever once had. Sophia found me in the kitchen an hour later. She didn't sit down. He called, she said. We're ready. I nodded. Outside, the light was going the way it had gone for my mother's apple years ago, in the same garden. The gathering is Friday, I said. I know, Sophia said. Neither of us said the rest of it because we didn't have to. Friday was the day this house would finally, formally, out loud, become the thing it had quietly been all along. And Eleanor would be in the room when it happened, because whatever else she is, she has never once been a woman who lets a door close quietly when she still has the strength to throw herself against it one last time. Part 8. The Clause. There is a version of Friday where none of the rest of it ever happened. I want that on the record, because people are going to say I destroyed her in front of everyone, and I didn't. I built her a door out, and I held it open, and I watched her decline to walk through it. An hour before the gathering, Sophia met Eleanor in the small sitting room off the East Hall, just the two of them. Sophia brought a single page. It was a settlement, and a real one. I told Sophia to make it real, not a trap wearing the costume of mercy. A modest sum, a confidentiality clause that protected Eleanor at least as much as it protected us. She would leave with means, with her name intact in public, and not one date from the last 5 months would ever be read aloud in a room full of people. Sophia set it on the table between them. She didn't sell it. Sophia has never sold anything in her life. She just makes the truth available and lets people arrive at it. This closes it here, she said, tonight, quietly. You sign this, you walk out the front door a private citizen, and no one in that gathering ever hears a single date. Eleanor read it. All of it. She's thorough. I've always genuinely respected that about her. And I know she weighed it because she is not a fool. She could see it was fair. She could see the confidentiality line was as much a gift as it was a leash. For about 10 seconds, she held a pen's width of a quiet, survivable life in her hands. But taking it meant walking out a side door as a woman who'd been caught. And Eleanor has never once in her life chosen a side door. Front doors are the entire point of her. Then she looked up, and she smiled the old smile, the one that had walked her into every room she'd ever wanted to be in. I'll take my chances with the room, she said, and she slid the page back across the table. Sophia didn't argue. There was nothing there to argue with. She picked the page up, squared its edges, and stood. All right, she said. That was all of it. All right. Then Sophia left, and Eleanor sat alone in the small room for a moment, and straightened her spine, and put on the face she keeps for an audience, and went out to win in public. I've thought a great deal about why she did that, why she chose the room over the door. The simplest answer is the truest one. Eleanor has beaten every hard surface in her whole life by getting an audience onto her side, and she genuinely could not imagine a room she couldn't turn. The quiet exit required her to admit, privately, in front of one person, that she had lost. The gathering let her keep believing, for one more hour, that she might still win. She chose the hour. It is the single most expensive hour anyone in my family has ever purchased. The gathering was in the long room, the formal one, the estate's real face, dressed up the way it only gets dressed for the occasions that count. Eleanor had curated the guest list herself weeks earlier, back when she still thought this evening would be a coronation of a very different sort. The symmetry of that had a taste I chose not to enjoy out loud. The same circle. My father's people and her people, the ones who'd shared her post and the ones who'd merely watched it climb. Julian among them, standing very carefully with what remained of her group, wearing the expression of a man who has realized he's on the wrong side of a room and cannot work out how to cross it without everyone seeing him do it. My father was there, quiet. He'd come early. He had hung his coat on the hook by the door himself that morning. I'd watched him do it, a small, ordinary gesture from a man who still believed, at that hour, that the evening might yet go some other way. I stood off to one side, not at the front. This was never my scene to run. I had only ever supplied the paperwork. I found a window, and for most of what followed, I looked out of it. You could feel the room trying to decide what kind of evening it was going to be. Half the guests still believed they'd come to a party. The other half had read the internet and come, quietly, to watch a hanging, and were ashamed of themselves for it, and had come anyway. Waiters drifted through with trays of glasses nobody was drinking. It had the specific held-breath quality of a room that knows something is about to happen and hasn't yet been told what. Sophia stood at the head of the room with a folder and not 1 ounce of theater in her. Before the evening goes on, she said in the flat voice of a woman reading out a delivery receipt, there is a provision in the marital agreement that has become operative. The parties are entitled to hear it read. And she read it, the clause, out loud. Clause 7, the same paragraph Eleanor's own lawyer had waved away months ago as boilerplate not worth the paper. In the event either spouse initiates the transfer or encumbrance of any asset held by the Ashworth family trust without the authorization of the beneficial owner, Sophia read evenly, that spouse forfeits all marital claim to trust property and shall stand liable to the trust for the full value of the attempted transfer, such debt recoverable by any lawful means, including a schedule of domestic service rendered in lieu of payment. She let the last of it settle onto the room. In lieu of payment. Nobody in that gathering had ever once heard a sentence shaped like that pointed at a woman like Eleanor. And Eleanor did the only thing Eleanor knows how to do. She stood up into it. This is theater, she said, to the room, not to Sophia. Her voice was still level, still lovely, but it was climbing. You all know me, you've sat at my table. This is a family punishing a woman for the crime of marrying into it. A jealous son who couldn't bear to see his father happy, dressing his cruelty up as a contract. She turned, slowly, giving each face its own moment, the way she'd worked 100 rooms before this one. Look at what they're doing, in front of all of you. Does not one single person in this room see it? And here is the one thing she had never, in 8 months of planning, planned for. The room said nothing. Not one voice, not her closest friend, not the woman who'd called her brave online, not Julian. They didn't turn on her. Turning on her would at least have been a response, something to push against. They simply went still. The specific, total stillness of people who have already read the date and quietly done the arithmetic and privately rearranged everything they thought they knew and are now only waiting for the evening to end so they can go home and talk about it somewhere else. She had curated an audience to protect her, and somewhere between the folder and the caption, the audience had quietly turned into a jury. Juries don't applaud. She tried once more, smaller now, and I think she heard the smallness in it herself as it left her. David, she said, turning to my father, the last card in her hand and the softest. Tell them who have been in this house. And my father looked at her, and then he looked at the floor, and he said nothing at all. That nothing was the loudest thing anyone said the entire evening. She looked around the room she had filled, and for the first time in the entire story, I watched her composure genuinely crack. Not into tears, never tears. Into the smallest flicker of a person discovering that the floor she'd staked everything on was never actually there. Sophia placed the contract on the table. She set a pen beside it, squared and unhurried. She didn't say sign. She didn't say anything at all. She simply made the pen available and stepped back, because the clause did not require Sophia to be persuasive. It only required Eleanor to be out of doors. I've wondered since what was running behind her eyes in the seconds before she signed. Whether some part of her was still, even then, working the angles, a lawsuit, an appeal, a sympathetic reporter, some door I hadn't thought to close. Almost certainly. Eleanor's mind does not stop generating exits just because the building is on fire. It is the single most relentless thing I have ever come up against, and I say that as the one man who ever outweighted it. But there were no exits left in that room. My mother had seen to that, years before Eleanor learned there was anything here to want. The pen was the only door on offer, and it opened exactly one way. Eleanor looked at the contract. She looked at the room one more time, checking it the way you check a pocket you already know is empty. Then she looked down the length of the room, at me. And I was looking out the window. I'll be honest about that, because it's the coldest thing I did in the whole affair, and I did it deliberately. There was a bird out there, or a bare branch, or nothing at all. I genuinely don't remember what was on the other side of the glass. What I remember is choosing not to watch. Not from squeamishness, because watching would have made it, one last time, a thing between the two of us, and I was finished handing her that. The most complete way to end the war with a person who lives on your attention is to have, at the decisive moment, somewhere else entirely to look. So I looked out the window, and behind me I heard the small dry click of a pen being lifted, and then the smaller sound of a signature going onto a page, and then nothing at all. No one cheered. No one so much as exhaled. A woman signed away the last of a title she'd married a decoy to win, in front of 40 people she had personally invited to watch a triumph, and the room received it in flawless silence. My father was the first to move. He didn't speak. He didn't look at Eleanor, and he didn't look at me. He crossed to the hook by the door, and he took down the coat he had hung there that morning, The morning it still believed the night might go some other way, and he put it on, and he walked out of his own house ahead of every one of his guests, without saying goodbye to a single one of them. The coat on the hook had been a small act of hope. Taking it down was the sound of a man setting the hope aside for good. I heard the front door open and close, and I kept my eyes on the window, and I let him go, because there was nothing I could have said in that room that would have weighed any less than the silence already did. I could tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the particular hollow that comes from being exactly right about someone you would have given a great deal to be wrong about. My father walked out into the dark alone that night, 61 years old, publicly undone for the second time in his life, and the fact that he had earned every step of it did not make the sound of that door any easier to keep my back to. 6 feet from the contract, Julian stood exactly where he had chosen to stand, on exactly the wrong side of it, and watched the whole thing happen. For one moment his eyes found mine. 25 years in that one look. He didn't nod, he didn't dare. He just looked and understood, and then he looked down at the floor, which is where Julian is going to be looking for a good while yet. And then, precisely on time, Penelope appeared in the doorway. Penelope has run the household staff of this estate for 22 years. She told me once, a long time ago, that she can hear a new hire coming before she ever lays eyes on them, something in the way a house rearranges itself around a person who doesn't yet know its habits. I had not explained any of the evening to her. I hadn't needed to. She'd worked the whole thing out weeks ago, the way she works everything out, from the kitchen, without being told a word. She stepped into the room and looked at Eleanor, the woman who, months earlier, had stood in a service corridor and instructed Penelope's own staff to start their mornings an hour earlier. Then she looked at me. I crossed the room. Not quickly. There was no hurry left anywhere in the building. I stopped beside Eleanor, and for the first time all evening, I spoke. "She'll be showing you the routine," I said. That was the whole of it. That was the entire speech I had been declining to give for the better part of a year. Penelope inclined her head, calm, professional, without a trace of cruelty in it. Penelope has no cruelty. She has something far worse for a woman like Eleanor, which is competence. "When you're ready," she said, "I'll walk you through the schedule." Eleanor looked at her, the head housekeeper she used to give orders to, offering now to walk her through the schedule. And I watched the last version of Eleanor, Mrs. Ashworth of Ashworth Estate, lady of a house that had never for one instant been hers, quietly stop existing and be replaced by a woman with a debt and a uniform somewhere in her near future. She didn't beg, I'll grant her that, all the way to the end. She didn't cry or plead or make one last scene. She looked at Penelope's steady, ordinary face, and something in her seemed to understand that this, not the folder, not the clothes, not the silence of the room, this was the real bottom. A schedule, a routine, the smallest and most daily kind of losing there is. That was always the shape of it, if you can call something dispatient a design. The point was never to ruin her. Ruin is loud, and loud things get sympathy, and sympathy buys a person a second act. The point was smaller and far more permanent than ruin. The point was Tuesday. And then the Tuesday after that. The schedule Penelope keeps does not care in the slightest who you used to be at dinner. Near the door, Julian was still trying to figure out how to leave without anyone watching him do it. There is no such way. There never was. He'd have known that if he'd ever once stayed in a hard room long enough to learn anything from it. I walked back to my window. The guests began, very quietly, to go looking for their coats. Penelope waited by the door with the patience of a woman who has all the time in the world, and a house that has always, quietly, belonged to the people who actually run it. And after a moment, with nowhere left anywhere to perform, Eleanor followed her out of the room. Part 9. The Routine. 2 weeks later, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, Penelope taught Eleanor how to fold a towel. There has always been a particular way we do it here. A specific fold, thirds, then halves, seam turned to the inside so a guest never sees a raw edge. My mother liked it that way. It is a small, pointless, exact thing, and it has outlived my mother by years now, because that is what a house actually is, the small, exact things that go on outliving the people who chose them. Before the towels, there had been the rest of it. Penelope had walked her through the mornings. Staff started 7, not 6. The east rooms cleaned twice a week, not daily. The schedule that assembles itself and has never once, in 22 years, needed anyone's approval on a Sunday. Every single instruction Eleanor had tried to issue in her first triumphant week, Penelope now handed back to her as the plain, unchangeable rule of the house, without ever once acknowledging the symmetry, because Penelope does not spend effort on irony. She just runs the house. They went through the rooms. The sitting room Eleanor had opened up. The guest bathroom she'd done in beige, where a scented candle still sits unlit on the counter, waiting for visitors who will now find their towels folded by the very woman who chose the tile. Penelope showed her how each room is kept. Eleanor nodded and learned it and kept her face. Then the linen closet, the narrowest room in the entire estate, a place Eleanor had never once had a reason to enter, where Penelope showed her the fold. Slowly, thoroughly, the way you teach anybody their first day on the job. Thirds first, Penelope said, her hands moving without hurry. Then in half, seam to the inside, and we never creased the monogram. Eleanor watched. Then she did it herself. She got it right on the second try, because Eleanor has never once in her life been stupid, and she performed the small competence exactly the way she has performed every competence I've ever seen her attempt. Chin level, attention complete, nothing wasted. She asked no question she didn't need to ask. In the narrowest room in the house, she was precisely as impressive as she has always been. The only thing that had changed was the audience. She was performing for Penelope now. And Penelope, who has folded these towels for 22 years, who has outlasted one employer and the better part of 2 marriages in this house, is not especially moved by a woman getting a fold right on the second attempt. And she performed it well. That's the part that stays with me. She'll be good at this. She'll be the most punctual, best folded, most professionally exact member of household staff this estate has ever employed. Because performing competence for an audience is the only mode Eleanor has ever owned, and she can't switch it off just because the audience has shrunk to one unimpressed housekeeper and a stack of guest linen. She's going to be excellent at the job she married my father to avoid. There's a whole tragedy folded into that if a person has the time for it. I mostly don't. I want to be careful here, though, because it would be easy to make this crueler than it actually was. Nobody stood over her. Nobody gloated. It was just a Tuesday with towels in it. And that ordinariness was the entire sentence, not a punishment with a witness and an ending, but a job with a schedule that starts again every single morning, whether or not you used to believe you owned the building it happens in. Penelope set the finished towel on the stack, squared the edge, and moved to the next item on the schedule. "Do you have any questions?" she asked. I wasn't there for this. I was 2 floors up, in a house that had gone quiet the way a fever finally breaks. But I know Eleanor, and I know her face in that particular half-second, and I would bet the whole estate on what it did. She had several questions, mostly about the towels. She was always so very specific as a hostess about towels, the weight of them, the scent, the fold. I find that fitting. She is now, professionally, very specific about towels. I go down to that end of the house sometimes, not often and not to look, to fetch something from the cellar or to speak to Penelope about the week. But once, through a doorway, I saw her at the far end of the service corridor, the same corridor where, a lifetime ago, she'd stood with a list and informed Sterling the mornings would start an hour earlier. She was carrying a stack of folded linen, and she was carrying it well, and she didn't see me, and I didn't stop. There was nothing to say. There is a version of me that wanted her to look up. He's the same one who used to shake when he got angry. I trained him out of myself years ago. He still surfaces now and then, at the end of a quiet corridor. I've learned not to give him anything to work with. That same afternoon, Sophia sent me a note. Not a call, a note, on paper, in her small exact hand, 1 line long. As promised. She didn't say promise to whom. She didn't need to. There is exactly one person Sophia ever made that promise to, in an office a long time ago, when my mother still had the strength to hold a pen and the foresight to see all the way down the years to a Tuesday like this one. I read the note once. I put it in the drawer with everything else, and I didn't answer it because some promises you honor best by simply letting them stay kept. My father played the voicemail on a Thursday evening, alone in his study, with the light going the way it always goes in that room. It's a good room for a reckoning, that study. It's the room where he hides from things, which means it is also, eventually, the room where the things come and find him. He'd hidden the closed folder in there. He'd hidden from the bank's phone call in there, and now he sat in it with a phone in his hand and a year of postponed arithmetic, and he finally did the sum. I know that he played it. I don't know precisely when he decided to. I'd stopped tracking his phone the way I'd once tracked everything else, because there was nothing left to track. But that evening he sat down at his desk and he took out his phone. And he opened the message with a little unheard dot beside it. The one I'd left him the morning after his wedding. The one he'd looked at 100 times over the past year and never once pressed. For a year that message had sat in his phone like a stone in a shoe he decided simply not to take off. He'd looked at it on the wedding night and turned the phone face down. He'd looked at it the day the bank called and turned it face down again. He'd looked at it the morning of the caption, thumb hovering, and set it down face up and made himself keep seeing it. All year, the little unheard dot. All year, the not pressing. A man can build an entire marriage in the space he clears by refusing to hear 4 sentences. He pressed it, I wasn't in the room. I will never know exactly what my own voice sounded like to him after everything, coming out of that small speaker a year too late, 4 calm sentences, no heat in any of them, asking him plainly to let Sophia walk him through the arrangement before anything got tangled together. Whatever it sounded like, he listened to all of it, to the very end. He didn't stop it halfway. He didn't set the phone down and walk away. When it finished, he sat for a long while without moving, a man alone in a quiet room with the exact size and shape of the thing he had chosen not to hear a year ago, now that it cost him nothing to hear it and everything to have waited. Then he stood up, and he came to find me. He found me in the kitchen. Of course he did. It's where I am. He was holding a folder, the estate papers, the operating documents, the things a nominee puts his name to and a son should have been sitting across the table for a year ago, and wasn't. He held them out to me. I took them. He nodded once. I nodded back. We stood there a moment in the kitchen, 2 men and a folder, and a very great deal of quiet between us. And neither of us said a single word, because there was no word that would have survived being spoken, and we both knew it. He didn't apologize. I didn't forgive him. Those are speeches, and we are not a family that makes speeches, not anymore, maybe not ever again. He handed me the papers. I took them. That was the whole of it, and it was the beginning of whatever the 2 of us are going to be now. People have asked me, since, whether I forgive him. It's the wrong question, and they're always a little disappointed when I say so. Forgiveness is a transaction. One person hands it over, the other receives it. The books get cleared. That is not what happened in the kitchen. Nothing got cleared. He simply started, at 61, doing the thing he should have done at the very beginning, handing me the truth instead of guarding himself from it. You don't forgive that. You just let it start, and you watch how far it gets, and you say none of this out loud, because saying it would be a speech, and a speech would end it. So we don't speak it. We do other things instead. He started coming down to the kitchen in the mornings, not to talk, just to stand in the room where I am, drinking his coffee on his feet the way he never used to, the way you stand when you're not sure you're allowed to sit. I let him. That's the whole of the language we have now. I don't tell him to leave, and he doesn't pretend nothing happened. Some mornings we get through the entire pot without a single word, and those are the good ones. My mother would have understood that completely. She spent 30 years loving a man who could not be told things, and she found ways to tell him anyway, in the architecture of a trust, in the fold of a towel, in a wall built so quietly he never knew he was standing behind it, until the day it kept him upright. I come by all of it honestly. I'm just louder about the paperwork than she ever was. Julian, somewhere across the city, was standing at the edge of a party he used to be the center of. I heard about it the way you hear about weather in a country you've already left. The room had quietly rearranged itself around the absence of him from the middle of it. The people who'd once have gathered near him had gathered somewhere else, without deciding to, the way a current just goes where the ground now sends it. He stood off near the bar. When the bartender came around, he ordered water. "Just water, thanks," he said, to a man who didn't matter, in a room that had already moved on without bothering to tell him. He was waiting for the evening to reach the point where a person can leave without it looking like fleeing. It never quite reaches that point. That is the one thing Julian spent 25 years never learning. There is no graceful way out of a room you should never have walked into. You just, eventually, leave and hope the door is quiet. There's an old photo somewhere from a birthday years back, the last good year, before any of this, the 2 of us in it, laughing at something neither of us would remember by the next morning. He's never posted it, hasn't, in 2 years. I think about that more than I think about the man himself. Some people delete you slowly, one unposted photograph at a time, and call it drifting apart. So that is the house now, quieter. My father in it, diminished and honest, which is a trade I never wanted to make and would make again tomorrow. Eleanor 2 floors below him, professionally. Specific about towels. Sophia's promise kept and filed. My mother's small exact fold outliving every one of us, one clean stack of linen at a time. And me, in the kitchen, holding a folder my father should have handed me a year ago, in a house that has finally, out loud, become the thing it always quietly was. People imagine revenge is loud. Mine came out quiet. It came out as a house that no longer has to perform for anyone. A name on a document that finally matches the name on the deed. A father who hands me the truth now, instead of a stranger's redecorating receipts. Nobody's coming to take anything. Nobody's owed a performance. For the first time since my mother got sick, I can stand in my own kitchen at 7 in the morning and hear nothing at all, and know that the nothing belongs to me, and that it's safe, and that it's finally, permanently quiet. She spent 8 months hunting a trophy. She picked the decoy. I'd been ready for 3 years. My mother built the room. I just waited, the way I have always waited, the way she taught me to wait, for someone to walk all the way into it on their own. And someone finally did.